Hello, this is Chima from RuckSackHack. How are you doing?
Just fine, fine. This is Robert.
Hey, Robert. It's nice to connect on LinkedIn. I just thought we made a good fit based on the fact that you're a UW alum and also you're into space and fictional science and also basically I just wanted to reach out and help other veterans using the platforms that we already have. So
Well, that's cool.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be live on RuckSackHack YouTube channel, so we can basically talk about your books, and maybe you can start off with a brief introduction of your biography, and basically we'll talk about two books you have. You go ahead, Robert.
Okay, yeah, sure. That sounds great. When would you like to do this?
Well, let's do it right now. Should be about 10 minutes.
Okay, let me grab a little headset here that will make my voice much clearer for you, and there'll be less interference. Okay, it'll just take me a moment to hook up to the phone.
Not a problem.
I found that it just makes things clearer, easier all around.
That's true.
Okay. So, does this sound better now?
A whole lot better.
Yeah, I thought it might.
All right. So basically, I'm kind of intrigued with your science fiction books. As you know, the last 2 weeks has been full of science news. So I was wondering if what your take is. Maybe that could be a segue after you do an introduction, and we can just talk about some of your books and how close to reality those are in this day and
I would
age.
be delighted. Yeah, I'd be absolutely delighted to do that. So, I assume at some point here you're going to say, we start now. You want me to give an introduction to myself, and then we'll follow your lead as far as your questions and your thoughts go.
Right. So
how you want to do it?
yeah. So let me start off with the jingle, and we'll officially get it kicked. All right, folks, welcome to another episode of RuckSackHack podcast. Today we have Robert G. Williscroft. He's the author of two science novels. They're fictional, but in this day and age, with all the talk about science and discovering new worlds, and also the talk about actually sending people to as tourists to the moon, it just seems befitting that we talk about this subject. Robert, if you could introduce yourself and maybe just a brief biography before we start the discussion.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to be on your show. My background is really very eclectic. I was a submarine officer for many years, and before that I was an enlisted guy on submarines as a sonar technician. I went into deep sea diving and spent quite a bit of time during the Cold War doing undersea espionage, which was quite fascinating, and one of the books I've written novelizes that whole process. I then went into the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Commission Corps, and I spent 3 years up in the Arctic ice pack, a year down on the equator doing research work, and a year at the geographic South Pole doing atmospheric research before I finally retired from government service and spent some time in business and doing consulting and writing my novels.
Sounds terrific. So one thing too, for the listeners out there, I went to University of Washington, so I noticed you were a UW grad. So how did University of Washington impact your career?
Well, rather significantly, when I was an enlisted submariner, the Navy selected me for a commissioning program and sent me to University of Washington, where I got a degree in marine physics and atmospheric physics. Then I went back into the submarine service as a commissioned officer, and my experience at the University of Washington was formative for me I've done in my life since then.
Sounds great. I'm sure a lot of UW, ROTC, and students will be proud of the work that you've done. So tell me a little bit about one of your novels, one that's called Slingshot. How does that relate to maybe things that are happening currently? Like I mentioned during the introduction, you have we just discovered new worlds, 7 new planets, and there's talk that Elon Musk is going to be taking some tourists to go close to the moon and back. So, how do these realities actually come close to what you're writing about in your fictional science novels?
Well, let me segue into that by telling you that when I went to the South Pole, I took a couple of research papers with me to study while I was down there. One of them was on a concept called the space launch loop. It was an exciting idea, and when I came out of the pole, I went to visit the scientist who authored the paper, and we spent some time together developing the concept, the engineering background, so that it could actually be done. And then we laid the outline for the novel Slingshot, which eventually got written and published, and it was actually launched at the International Space Elevator Conference in Seattle back in August of 2015. The concept is very much like a maglev train, except that through some interesting aspects of physics, this track lifts itself up to about 100 kilometers high, so it's up above most of the atmosphere, and it is accessed by elevator cables that drop down from this height to the Earth. In the novel, the two islands, Baker Island and Jarvis Island along the equator in the Pacific, are used. They're just about 2,000 kilometers apart, and capsules with freight or with people ride up the elevator, and then they are magnetically attached to a fast-moving ribbon of soft iron, and they are accelerated along this 2,000-kilometer-long track. They release themselves from the magnetic attachment at the appropriate point, which launches them out toward the moon or Mars or wherever their ultimate destination is. And the amazing thing about it is that it can be done without rockets and the expense of rockets, and it can be done with today's technology. And the only thing holding it back from being done now is the infrastructure cost and the fact that we just don't have enough material and people to move into space right now to make it cost effective. But there are many groups that have their eyes on the concept, and once it becomes cost effective, it's going to happen.
Wow, that is fantastic. In fact, NASA has been opening up space exploration and support to private enterprise. Perhaps that might accelerate the whole process. What do you think?
Yeah, I was, when the book was launched in Seattle, I was sitting in this conference with scientists from around the world, and there were several industrialists, including a couple of them from Japan, who just were eyeing the concept with great interest, because if you can find a way to get into space economically, then the benefits that space offers you are just that much more profitable. And a guy like Elon Musk, of course, has his eyes on it and is looking to turn it into something that will be fully profitable in the relatively near future. I think we'll see this happen in the next 10, 15 years.
Wow, that is some exciting news, and we're living in exciting times. So tell me a little bit about Slingshot.
Well, Slingshot is the story of the construction of the first space launch loop. And it looks at the people who do it, the guys who are in charge, right down to the Mohawk high iron workers who are doing the constructing of the nodules where the elevator is attached to the actual track. And it tells the story of the challenges that they run into, the financial challenges, the physical challenges, the engineering challenges, and it's a book that's received several awards and lots of accolades, and it's a very fun read.
Wow. So for those that want to check it out, I have the links posted on the YouTube. This particular episode is hack number 19, the RuckSackHack Bootcamp podcast. So great. So let's take a quick short break, and then we're gonna talk about your next your other book. Okay, just hold on. All right, so we're back with Robert G. Williscroft, a science fiction author, a Submariner, and also a fellow UW graduate. This is Rucksack Hack, where we basically talk about all things veterans and also use our platform to help with leadership on different verticals in our industries. Space is one of those industries that I've been always fascinated about, and it's interesting to be able to actually talk to somebody that's not only has worked on the cutting edge doing research, but also has authored 2 books. The second book we're going to talk about is the Starship Compact. So Robert, how does this particular book maybe differ from the other one, and to what extent is this more like going outside of our solar system kind of deal?
Well, the book is called The Star Child Compact, and it came about because because of my ongoing interest in space, like yours, I was paying some close attention to the Cassini flyby of a moon of Saturn. The moon was called Iapetus, and it had some unusual features. Among other things, Iapetus has a mountain range, a very narrow mountain range that is about 20 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers high, that goes all the way around the equator of Iapetus. Furthermore, Iapetus has a density that would be just fine if it were a typical snowball moon, but it isn't. It's a rocky moon, and the only way that it could have the density that it has is if it were hollow. I got to thinking about that, and I thought, what if Iapetus were a derelict starship? And that idea, percolated in my mind for a while, and I ended up writing a novel whereby the nations of Earth put together an expedition. Now, this is in the near future, something that certainly our children could experience, but they put together an expedition using a Vasimer engine-powered spaceship, and we are developing Vasimer engines right now. And they travel all the way to Iapetus, to the vicinity of Saturn, which is so far away that it takes a radio signal 1.5 hours to make a one-way trip. And when they get there, the first half of the book is about the trip there. Additional excitement is that a jihadist manages to stow away on the spaceship and causes quite a bit of trouble until he finally is integrated into the crew, because the crew doesn't want to just space him. And so he plays an important role as the story moves forward. Now, when they get to Iapetus, they find out that it is indeed a derelict starship. And the second half of the book is what they find out. They end up meeting the descendants of the people who built that starship. They call them the founders, and they had played a role throughout human history, kind of bouncing in and out of human culture and leaving their marks as they did so. And the whole of human culture on Earth and in space is affected by what they find in Iapetus. And that is the story of this Star Child Compact.
Wow, that's terrific. It kind of reminds me of the movie that I just saw, where I think it was last month or so. The movie Mars, where the act.
Oh, that's a wonderful movie.
Yeah. You know how they had to kind of pretty much on their way back, they had left that one of their, their crew members, and they had to go back to get them. So that was interesting. So you have some fascinating imaginations, but the thing about it is this could actually be a reality. With respect to the propulsion technology that's out there, I know you said they're already working on the propulsion that you imagine in your book. Do you think it's gonna be 20, 30 years before that comes to light, or do you think like the NASA budget um, is could it be something where it's more like you envision more countries coming together, their space programs and putting this together, or do you think private enterprise might be able to speed up the process to get
Well,
us?
I think private enterprise certainly is going to speed up the process. In the Star Child Compact, I actually have private enterprise setting up a large corporation to put this expedition into effect, but the governments of Earth became so interested in the possibilities should it be a successful expedition that they kind of muscled their way in and took over. But it started out as a private enterprise, and much of what happens is run by private enterprise, including a big colony complex at the L4 Lagrangian point, about 380,000 miles ahead of the moon in its orbit. So, yeah, I look at that as a very real sort of thing. And I think that I think that people fail to remember that the Wright brothers flew an aircraft on Kitty Hawk, and 66 years later, Neil Armstrong stepped out on the moon. From the first flight to landing on the moon was just 66 years.
Wow.
So there's a lot that has happened since then, and there's a lot that's happening right now. And I think that in our lifetimes, we're going to see huge advances. Whether we will develop the ability to travel from our sun to another star in our lifetime, I don't know. That's a big leap. But there are some really smart people working on that problem as well.
Wow, wow. It's interesting you kind of mentioned going to another star. I think 2 weeks ago, NASA had a press conference where they discovered this 7 new planets on the TRAPPIST-1 system. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? What your thoughts are?
What I thought was so neat about that is that they not only found planets, but they found a couple of them in the life zone, that is, in the range away from the star, in the orbital range where water can be liquid, like on our planet. And that's exciting because if we understand the way the universe works, there's very likely going to be life on one or both of those planets. And where there's life, there's all kinds of things that can happen. I think that's just hugely interesting.
I think so too. So thank you again, Robert. Like I said, listeners, check out the Star Child Compact and also Slingshot. Both books have links on the YouTube channel, and we're also going to place the links on the blog and also links on the podcast that will be on iTunes. Any final words, Robert, before we wrap this episode?
Well, I really enjoyed being on your show, and I'm in the middle of writing a third book in the series. It will be called The Iapetus Federation, Exodus from Earth.
Wow.
Which carries forward where the Star Child Compact leaves off.
Sounds really interesting. Anything we could do, maybe when you're done with that, you can come back and we can chat about that.
I would love to.
All right. Thank you very much, and you have a great one.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, folks, we're going to continue this episode. Real quick, if you're interested in any one of those books, be sure to click the link below and go ahead and support the phenomenal work by Robert G. Williscroft. All right. And as you know, also, I have a book that's called Unleashing the Creative Umbra. It has a little bit of a science component to it because I talk about the umbra, which is the dark part of a shadow that's cast during an eclipse, and how you can tap into that to basically get creative. All right, so here's a little announcement about that that I put together. So I also have the link down there, Unleashing the Creative Umbra. Until next time, this is Captain Retired Walla from the RuckSackHack podcast.